Ethan sat on his tattered couch, staring at the eviction notice in his hands. His fingers tightened around the paper as a sinking feeling settled in his stomach. He had lost his job 2 months ago, and with every passing day, his savings dwindled to nothing. Rent was due, and he had nothing left to give. He turned to Mia, who was lounging on her phone, barely acknowledging his presence. "Mia, we need to talk," he said, his voice strained. She sighed, not looking up. "About what?" "The rent. We're out of time. I got the final notice today." He shrugged. "I told you last week. I don't have extra to spare." Frustration bubbled inside him. "You go out every night, dress in new clothes, but you don't have money to help?" Her eyes flickered with annoyance. "Don't turn this on me. Take care of myself. You should have figured this out by now." Ethan swallowed the bitterness rising in his throat. There was no point arguing. He needed a solution, and fast. With a heavy breath, he grabbed his jacket and stepped out. The walk to Mr. Holloway's office felt longer than usual. The landlord was a man of few words, but his presence was commanding. Ethan had barely interacted with him outside of rent transactions, but he knew the man held all the power. When he knocked, the door opened almost instantly. Mr. Holloway stood there, tall and composed, his sharp eyes scanning Ethan before stepping aside. "You're here about the notice," he stated, more than asked. Ethan nodded. "I just need a little more time. A few weeks, maybe a month. I don't do extensions." His voice was firm but not unkind. "But I do offer alternatives." Ethan frowned. "What kind of alternatives?" Mr. Holloway leaned back, a small smirk playing on his lips. "Come to my place tonight. I'm having a gathering. Let's talk then." Ethan hesitated. There was something unreadable in the man's gaze. "Is this about work?" "Something like that." With no other option, Ethan agreed. That evening, he told Mia he'd be out. She barely responded, too busy texting someone, her lips curling into a smile that wasn't meant for him. The sight left a sour taste in his mouth. Mr. Holloway's penthouse was nothing like Ethan had imagined. It was sleek, expensive, and exuded an aura of control. The moment he stepped inside, he realized it wasn't just the two of them. 2 other men were there. Daniel, charismatic with sharp eyes and an easy smile, and Lucas, quiet but intense. They greeted Ethan with a familiarity that unsettled him. Drinks were poured. The air was thick with something unspoken. Ethan felt like he had walked into a game where he didn't know the rules. Mr. Holloway finally broke the silence. "You're in debt, Ethan. We can help with that." Ethan's grip tightened around his glass. "And what do you want in return?" Daniel leaned in, smirking. "You'll find out soon enough." Ethan could feel the weight of their gazes. Mr. Holloway leaned back in his chair, studying him with an unreadable expression, while Daniel smirked, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Lucas remained quiet, but his presence was just as heavy. "You're tense," Daniel noted, his voice smooth. "Relax. We don't bite. Unless you want us to." Ethan let out a short laugh, but it came out awkward. He wasn't sure if they were joking or not. The energy in the room was unlike anything he had experienced before. Unspoken, charged, expectant. Mr. Holloway finally spoke. "You need help." "We're offering it." Ethan exhaled. "I don't understand what you're asking me for." Lucas finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "You do. You just don't want to admit it yet." Ethan shifted in his seat. The air between them felt suffocating in the best and worst way. He had spent years feeling invisible, unheard, like an afterthought in his own relationship. And now, 3 men he barely knew were giving him their full attention. It was unsettling and intoxicating. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. He glanced down and saw a message from his friend Mark. "You need to see this." Curious, he opened the attachment. A grainy video loaded, and as it played, his stomach dropped. Mia. Her laugh. Her body pressed against another man's. The way she leaned in, kissed him like she hadn't kissed Ethan in months. The glass in his hand felt like it might shatter. He swallowed hard, willing himself to stay composed, but his vision blurred with anger and something far worse, relief. "You look like you just saw a ghost," Daniel murmured. Ethan let out a bitter chuckle. "Close enough." Mr. Holloway didn't pry. Instead, he poured another drink, sliding it toward Ethan. "You don't owe her anything anymore." Ethan's fingers trembled as he took the glass, the warmth of the liquor burning his throat. He felt weightless, unmoored. Years of loyalty had amounted to nothing. He had been holding on to something that had already let go of him. Daniel shifted closer, his voice softer now. "You've spent so long denying yourself. Maybe it's time you stopped." Ethan exhaled shakily. He knew exactly what was being offered now. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure he wanted to say no. Ethan stared at the glass in his hand, the weight of everything settling in. The betrayal, the loneliness, the exhaustion of always fighting for something that had already crumbled. His world had been turned upside down in a single moment, and yet, sitting here surrounded by them, he didn't feel as lost as he should. Mr. Holloway's voice was steady. "No one's forcing you. But if you stay knowing exactly what you're stepping into." Ethan's pulse thrummed against his skin. He looked at Daniel, at Lucas. There was no judgment in their eyes. Only understanding, curiosity, something deeper that he couldn't quite name. The tension in the air wasn't just about attraction. It was about a shift, a choice. He could walk away. He could go back to his empty apartment, to the cold bed that Mia had long since abandoned, to a life that no longer fit him. Or he could let go of everything that had been holding him back. His fingers loosened around the glass. "I'm tired of pretending," he admitted. Daniel's smirk softened. "Then stop." Lucas reached for the bottle, refilling Ethan's drink without a word, but there was something deliberate in the action, like an unspoken invitation. Mr. Holloway leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "You're not just paying off rent, Ethan. That's not what this is about." Ethan swallowed. "Then what is it about?" Slow smile. "A new beginning." Ethan didn't flinch when Daniel reached for his wrist, thumb grazing over his pulse. He didn't pull away when Lucas met his gaze, something knowing in the way he watched him. And when Mr. Holloway stood, offering nothing but silent expectation, Ethan knew there was no hesitation left. For the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of what came next.